The silent expert. The words cut through the sterile air of the downtown Culinary Institute like a dull knife through overcooked meat. That ancient thing belongs in a restaurant museum, Grandma, not in a professional kitchen competition. Why don't you two go find a community center cooking class? This is for serious chefs. Marcus Chen's voice dripped with the kind of arrogance that comes from 3 years of culinary school and 0 real-world humility. Each word was a calculated insult, designed to wound, designed to establish dominance in front of the gathered crowd of aspiring chefs and food industry professionals. The crowd, a mix of culinary students in pristine whites and food bloggers with expensive cameras, snickered nervously. It was that particular kind of laughter that emerges when cruelty finds an audience, when people choose complicity over courage. The elderly woman, whose name was Li Chen, stood perfectly still beside her vintage cast-iron wok. The pan had seen decades of service, its surface black and seasoned to perfection through countless meals. She didn't flinch at the insult. She didn't offer a retort. Her weathered hand simply rested on the worn wooden handle, and her eyes remained fixed on her prep station. Her posture was a masterclass in composure, a quiet testament to decades of discipline that loud words could never penetrate. But beside her, her granddaughter Li reacted with an even more profound silence. She tied her simple white apron with slow, deliberate movements, her dark eyes sweeping across the sneering face of Marcus, the competition's supposed star contestant. His station was a shrine to modern culinary excess. Molecular gastronomy equipment, sous vide machines, precision tools that cost more than most people's monthly rent. From the judges' table, Chef Isabella Moretti, a 3 Michelin star legend visiting from New York, watched the interaction carefully. She didn't see the fancy equipment or the loud young chef. She saw the way the young woman moved. She saw economy of motion, a center of balance that spoke of thousands of hours in professional kitchens. She saw a calmness that wasn't passive. It was predatory. If you believe that true mastery is found not in the equipment you own, but in the skill you've earned, subscribe to The Final Watch for more stories where quiet competence defeats loud arrogance. The insult lingered in the air-conditioned space like the smell of burned garlic. Marcus swelled with attention, his chest puffing beneath his designer chef's coat that looked like it had been purchased yesterday and worn only for Instagram photos. He saw Dorothy as a relic, a living fossil from an era of simple home cooking, clinging to techniques that had no place in the modern world of avant-garde cuisine. Seriously, Grandma, Marcus continued, his voice carrying across the competition floor. What is that, a hand-me-down from the Ming Dynasty? We're doing a molecular gastronomy challenge today. You'll be lucky to boil water with that ancient cookware. He gestured dramatically to his own station, a sprawling landscape of gleaming stainless steel and digital precision. This is a Thermomix TM6. It's a culinary computer. It costs $8,000. It speaks a language of precision that your grandmother's wok has completely forgotten. The crowd's laughter grew louder, more confident now that the alpha had asserted dominance twice without response. Dorothy's fingers, wrapped gently around the wok's handle, were the only sign of her internal state. They were elegant fingers, marked by decades of knife work and heat, and they tightened just a fraction. She had cooked with a wok just like this one in her family's restaurant in San Francisco's Chinatown, had felt its familiar weight through good times and desperate ones. This wok wasn't just metal, it was family history, a connection to her mother and grandmother before her, a symbol of survival and excellence passed down through generations. She glanced at her granddaughter, Li, and a silent conversation passed between them. Li's eyes, clear and steady, simply said, "It's okay, grandmother, let him talk." And Dorothy relaxed, the quiet dignity returning to her posture. She wasn't here to prove anything to this arrogant boy. She was here to cook alongside her granddaughter, to share one more competition together. Li, for her part, continued her methodical preparation. She had laid out her ingredients with military precision. Fresh ginger, scallions, premium soy sauce, hand-pulled noodles. Nothing was high-tech or Instagram-worthy, but everything was perfect. Her knives were simple but razor-sharp, her cutting board worn but spotless. These were tools of function, not fashion. Marcus's condescending gaze drifted to her station. "I see the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Need help with that molecular foam technique? At least you've got some modern ingredients, sweetheart. The chemistry can be tricky for beginners." Li didn't even look up. Her hands moved with a precision that was mesmerizing to those who understood what they were seeing. She minced ginger with such speed and uniformity that each piece was identical. She julienned scallions in perfect 3 millimeter strips. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. Each action flowed into the next with the practiced grace of a surgeon or a concert violinist. Her silence wasn't submission. It was fortress walls. So absolute that Marcus's insults simply bounced off and clattered uselessly to the polished floor. The competition was a showcase of molecular gastronomy, a test of the contestants' ability to transform traditional ingredients into avant-garde presentations. But today, the kitchen's temperamental ventilation system had created unpredictable heat zones across the cooking stations. Some areas were scorching hot, others barely warm. A nightmare scenario for precision cooking that required exact temperatures. One by one, the competition's best chefs struggled and failed. Their digital thermometers gave contradictory readings. Their precisely calibrated sous vide machines couldn't compensate for the fluctuating ambient temperatures. Foams collapsed, gels refused to set, and carefully timed reductions burned or remained watery. The rhythmic ding of the timer announcing successful dishes was replaced by frustrated sighs and the scraping of ruined food into trash bins. The atmosphere grew tense. This was supposed to be a celebration of modern culinary innovation, broadcast to thousands of viewers online, and it was rapidly becoming an embarrassing disaster. Marcus, who had been so loud in his earlier mockery, was now conspicuously silent as his own nitrogen-frozen foam turned into a puddle of flavored water. He blamed the equipment, the temperature, the competition organizers, anything but his own inflexibility. It was in this moment of collective failure that Li Chen finished her preparation. She stood before her grandmother's vintage wok, her body perfectly aligned with the heat source. She didn't use a thermometer or a timer. Instead, she simply watched. She watched the subtle shimmer of heat rising from the wok's surface. She watched the way oil moved when it hit the metal. She watched her grandmother's slight nods, a language between them built over decades. She was reading the kitchen, not with technology, but with an ancient, instinctual understanding honed by 10,000 hours in conditions far more challenging than this. Her grandmother Dorothy stood beside her, a silent, steady presence. She placed a gentle, weathered hand on Li's shoulder, a gesture of pure, unconditional support. Dorothy wasn't a chef of Li's caliber anymore. Her hands weren't as fast, her endurance not what it once was, but she knew a master when she saw one. She had trained Li from childhood, had seen her rise through the ranks of professional kitchens with the same quiet determination she showed now. Dorothy gave Li's shoulder a slight squeeze and stepped back, becoming just another observer. Li's movements were poetry in motion, a physical manifestation of absolute focus. She heated the wok with practiced patience, waiting for that precise moment when the metal reached its perfect temperature, not measured by a device, but felt through experience. Her left hand held fresh ingredients. Her right hand controlled a simple metal spatula, worn smooth by years of use. She wasn't just cooking, she was performing a ritual passed down through generations. The competition dish required creating a deconstructed dumpling using molecular gastronomy techniques, foams, gels, spherification. Every other contestant was following the modern playbook, trying to force ingredients into fashionable presentations. Li took a different path. She moved with breathtaking speed, her hands a blur as she stir-fried ingredients in her grandmother's wok. The flames leaped and danced, controlled not by a gas valve, but by the angle and movement of the pan. She was conducting an orchestra of heat, oil, and ingredients. In minutes, while others struggled with temperamental equipment, she had created something that made Chef Moretti lean forward in her seat. Li had made traditional soup dumplings, xiaolongbao, but elevated to an art form. The skins were so thin they were nearly translucent, each pleat folded with mechanical precision. 23 pleats per dumpling, exactly as tradition demanded. Inside, the soup was a perfect gel at room temperature, flavored with a reduction so concentrated it glowed amber in the light. When steamed, it would liquefy into pure, distilled essence of flavor. She presented alongside it a series of small dishes, each one a perfect miniature of traditional Chinese cuisine, executed with a precision that made molecular gastronomy look clumsy by comparison. Hand-pulled noodles so thin they looked like silk threads. A tea-smoked egg with a yolk that remained liquid despite being fully cooked. A soup so clear it looked like water but exploded with flavor. There was no foam for foam's sake, no gel without purpose. Every element had meaning, had roots in centuries of culinary tradition, executed with a technical perfection that silenced the room. She plated everything in 15 minutes, a task that should have taken 40. The judges approached her station in stunned silence. Chef Moretti lifted a dumpling with her chopsticks, the traditional tool of respect. She bit into it, and her eyes closed. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then Chef Moretti opened her eyes, and they were glistening with emotion. "Perfect," she whispered. "Absolutely perfect." The other judges tasted, and one by one, their expressions transformed from skepticism to awe. But it was what happened next that created the legend. Chef Moretti stood, walked not to the microphone, but directly to the competition organizer's table, where all contestant registration forms were kept. The crowd watched in confused silence as she pulled up a tablet and began scrolling through files. Her expression shifted from curiosity to recognition to something close to reverence. She walked back to Li's station, the tablet held in her hand, her footsteps echoing in the silent hall. "I think everyone here deserves to know who they've been sharing a kitchen with today," Chef Moretti announced, her voice carrying the weight of authority earned through decades at the pinnacle of culinary arts. She looked directly at Marcus, who had shrunk considerably. His earlier arrogance evaporated. "This wok," she gestured to Dorothy's cast-iron pan, "belonged to Li Chen, who ran one of the most respected restaurants in San Francisco's Chinatown for 40 years. She earned a James Beard Award in 1987 for preserving traditional Cantonese cuisine. She trained under masters in Hong Kong and brought their techniques to America. This ancient thing has more culinary heritage than anything else in this room." A wave of shame washed over the crowd. The nervous laughter from earlier now felt like a stain on their character. Chef Moretti then turned her attention to the tablet, her voice taking on a formal cadence, as if reading a citation. "Chen Li Wei," she read, each word landing with impact. "Executive Chef, Blue Lotus, San Francisco. 3 Michelin stars, youngest chef in California history to achieve this distinction at age 28. A collective gasp rippled through the observers. 3 Michelin stars, the absolute pinnacle of culinary achievement, held by fewer than 100 chefs in America. Trained under grandmother Li Chen from age 5, apprenticed at Din Tai Fung Taipei for 3 years, worked at Ultraviolet Shanghai, Bow Innovation Hong Kong, and 11 Madison Park, New York, before opening Blue Lotus at age 26. She paused, letting the credentials sink in. Winner of the Bocuse d'Or Asia Pacific, winner of the World Gourmet Summit, and featured on Netflix's Chef's Table. Her restaurant has a 6-month waiting list and has been called the finest Chinese restaurant in the Western Hemisphere by the New York Times. Chef Moretti then did something that stunned everyone in that culinary institute. She, a 3 Michelin star legend herself, bowed deeply to Li, a traditional sign of respect between master chefs. "Chef Chen," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "it is an honor to judge your work. Forgive the ignorance here today. They made assumptions. They mistook humility for inexperience. They confused tradition with obsolescence. They will not make that mistake again." She held the bow, waiting. Li, her face composed, bowed in return with equal depth and grace. "Thank you, Chef Moretti," was all she said, her voice calm and steady. "The honor is mine." The story of the dumpling and the quiet chef spread through the culinary world like wildfire. It was the only topic of conversation in cooking schools, restaurant kitchens, and food media outlets. The tale was retold and embellished, quickly ascending from a simple competition moment into the realm of industry legend. Photos of Li's dumplings went viral. The competition footage was watched millions of times. But more importantly, the story became a parable about assumptions, about respecting tradition, about understanding that the quietest person in the kitchen might be the most skilled. The competition dish Li created was later added to Blue Lotus's menu as the Heritage Dumpling, with a portion of proceeds going to culinary scholarships for students from immigrant families. Marcus Chen, no relation, became the story's cautionary figure. He wasn't formally punished. The public humiliation was deemed lesson enough. But something broke in him that day, something that needed to break. His entire identity, built on expensive equipment and flashy techniques, had been demolished by traditional tools and ancestral knowledge. He disappeared from the culinary scene for 6 months. When he returned, he was a different chef. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hunger to learn. He approached Dorothy and Li at a food industry event months later, his head bowed. "Chef Chen, Mrs. Chen," he said quietly, I have no excuse for my behavior. I was arrogant, I was ignorant, I disrespected not just you, but everything your cooking represents. I'm sorry. Dorothy simply nodded, her weathered face showing understanding. She had seen young chefs like Marcus before, full of fire and ego, and she knew what humility could do to transform them. Li looked at the humbled young chef, her expression neutral but not unkind. Respect isn't about the tools you use or the techniques you know, she said evenly. It's about understanding that every cooking tradition evolved for a reason. It's about honoring the people who came before. Focus on learning, not performing. She then turned back to her conversation. For her, the lesson was delivered, the moment concluded. Those simple words became a turning point in Marcus's career. He enrolled in traditional cooking classes, Chinese, French, Italian, Japanese, learning foundations he had skipped in his rush to master trendy techniques. He spent a year working in traditional restaurants for minimal pay, learning wok technique from old masters, learning patience from pasta makers, learning precision from sushi chefs. He became, eventually, a respected chef in his own right, not for innovation, but for his deep respect for culinary traditions and his ability to teach others to honor the past while creating the future. The story of Li Chen and her grandmother's wok became a teaching tool in culinary schools worldwide. It appeared in textbooks, in documentaries, in lectures. The lesson was always the same. Never judge a chef by their equipment, their age, or their adherence to tradition. Judge them only by what they put on the plate. Years later, Chef Moretti invited Dorothy and Li to a special ceremony at the Culinary Institute of America. They had established a new scholarship program, and at the entrance to the scholarship office was a bronze plaque. It read, "The Dorothy and Li Chen Scholarship for Traditional Culinary Arts." Beneath the names was a simple engraved sentence in Chinese and English. Genshen Ye Mao, deep roots, strong branches. Dorothy attended the ceremony in her wheelchair, now in her 90s. Li stood beside her, one hand on her grandmother's shoulder. Marcus was there too, now a scholarship committee member, having dedicated himself to helping young chefs learn the lessons he had learned the hard way. The legacy of that day wasn't just a plaque or a scholarship. It was a shift in how an entire generation of chefs approached their craft. The best young chefs were no longer those with the most expensive equipment or the flashiest techniques. They were those who studied the masters, who learned traditional methods before attempting innovation, who understood that true creativity comes from deep knowledge of fundamentals. Li continued to run Blue Lotus, eventually opening a second location that focused exclusively on teaching traditional Chinese cooking techniques to the next generation. Her grandmother's wok hung on the wall there, retired from service but honored as a teaching tool, a reminder that the most important ingredient in any kitchen isn't found in a catalog. It's respect. For the ingredients, for the techniques, for the people who came before, and for the profound truth that competence speaks in whispers while arrogance shouts into the void. True mastery doesn't announce itself. It simply appears on the plate, undeniable and perfect, requiring no explanation and accepting no argument. The ultimate statement a chef can make is to let the food speak for itself, to allow their skill to be the only credential they need. The quiet professional doesn't need to announce their expertise because their work is self-evident. They walk with humility, born not of weakness, but of absolute confidence in their abilities, a confidence so profound it requires no external validation. True legacy isn't found in fame or acclaim, but in the standards that live on in those inspired to be better. It's the understanding that the ultimate measure of a chef isn't the noise they make about their accomplishments, but the grace and humility with which they share their knowledge. For Dorothy Chen, that legacy was her granddaughter, a world-class chef who still called her every Sunday for recipe advice. For Li Chen, that legacy was every young chef who learned that tradition isn't the enemy of innovation, it's the foundation. And for everyone who witnessed that day at the Culinary Institute, the legacy was a simple lesson. Look deeper, listen harder, and never ever judge a chef by their equipment. Judge them by what they create when the heat is on and everyone else has failed. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, subscribe to The Final Watch.